Hey, what's up? Gary here. Looking at getting started at leveling input and output on your quad Cortex? Let's go check it out. All right, let's get started first by giving you a bit of a preamble on your volume control, your overall volume control on the quad Cortex, and how to achieve what some folks in digital audio fields consider unity in leveling. What this basically means is no attenuation on your output of a device that you're going to record. Okay, and the way that you achieve audio unity in your output on the quad Cortex is to take this big volume knob right here and make sure it's turned all the way to the right, all the way to 100%. If you have it less than 100%, you're attenuating your output, okay? And that can be problematic later depending on how you're trying to use your different presets and what inputs and outputs you're using, because those configurations, right, if you're not at unity and you're continually kind of changing the volume via this knob, you're gonna get inconsistent results, and you're definitely not going to like that, especially if you're in a live gig. You'll have a lot of peaks and valleys if you're not configuring properly when it comes to that. So first things first, always try to achieve 100% unity with this device, which means turning that output knob, as long as it's in its default state and not controlling headphones or anything else, okay? Have that volume knob turned all the way up to 100% in order to be able to achieve unity.
All right, so now we are going to check out our input configurations and being able to get the best overall input config for your quad Cortex and really for your configuration of devices and guitars that you're going to be using as input devices, okay? In this case, I'm gonna focus on guitars, so I'm not gonna look at like synths or vocals or anything else. Like that's out of the scope here, okay? So like you can use the same procedure, which is totally fine, but focusing on the guitar, I think it's gonna be a little bit easier, obviously because I have a guitar and I'm a guitarist mainly, but also for the opportunity to be able to understand from a guitarist perspective how you would, kind of go about trying to get leveling under control. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go to your I/O settings on the device. Now in Cortex control, that's hitting this ellipses in the upper right-hand corner and then going down to I/O settings and clicking it. You can also swipe down, so press and swipe down on the screen in order to be able to display this as well. But for now, I just want to be able to pull that up so you can see on my screen where we're at. Okay, so I have my guitar configured and plugged in on input 1. And I have this running through to my DAW so I can record and do some of this stuff, but it's the exact same procedure. If you're not using a DAW, it would just be a power amp instead. Okay, so no difference here really. But I have the volume knob at 100%, as we mentioned, to gain unity, right? And now the next thing I would suggest you to do is check out the inputs that you're going to be using, right? And if you want to, I would more than likely tell you that your same configuration on input 1 is probably what you want on input 2, if you're gonna do that. If you run stereo, that's a given, right? But even if not, and you decide that you're going to use this in the future, if you want to keep your balanced input the same, then you're going to have to balance the configuration across these inputs. So if you're using your guitar and it's just your rig and it's not another, like bassist, for example, or a lead and a rhythm guitarist using input 1, input 2, obviously you might have a little bit of a difference there depending. So there's a lot of scenarios here. So understand that what I'm gonna tell you is just kind of real generalized basic things. I can't get into every creative way that you can use this device, but I'm thinking just for you, if you're a singular musician and you're trying to use this, I would suggest probably balancing input 1 and input 2 across if you're going to do this as well. But I digress. We're in the state of I/O settings. The thing that I would do first is the guitar that you're going to use to get started to balance. I would take your hottest guitar you have. I would take the guitar that's going to have the hottest output from the pickups and what potentially, like say for example, something that's got active pickups on it that are like Alco or something like that are going to be really high output. I'd probably go with that first, because if you can get that balanced and under control, then your little bit lesser outputted devices aren't going to go louder or do something like that, right? And your loudest guitar will be balanced at a level that's maintains and feels good. And then from there, for your maybe lesser output guitars that don't have quite as much of a hot pickup configuration, you can slightly boost the preset, right, to be able to give you what you need, knowing that you're going to be using a different guitar for that given preset. Okay, so that's what's going to give you that control to feel a little bit more comfortable with making that happen, which I think will be good. At any rate, let's take a look at our input levels. So first and foremost, the biggest thing that we care about, okay, is not clipping. Clipping is always going to be a terrible thing to have happen. You don't want it. You don't want it in your input, and you don't want it in your output. Okay, so we definitely have to watch if you're getting any clipping. And that's the main thing we're going to use, is looking at our levels and getting you as close as you can to this little place right here. If you see on the screen for the Cortex control, see that little line right there on your input 1 level? Right here, this is exactly where you want to try to get your volume as close to when you're doing standard playing. Now, it doesn't mean beating on your guitar to a point where, you know, it's like absolutely like slamming those strings, but playing fairly normally, but still kind of heavy. Like watch, for example, what it's going to do if I just strum a few times. You see how I'm getting right to the edge of that line, and I'm not going over, okay? Now I'm at 0 dB right now. Let's say I put this up to 4 dB. Now this is a high output guitar. It's got active pickups. It's in an active pickup configuration right now, and these are output pickups. So it's going to be high, okay? I've boosted this a little bit more though, right? So now we're at 4. You see that? You see that red? That red that's coming in occasionally? You don't want to see that. If you see a little bit of it occasionally, okay, but try your best not to see it at all, okay? Now, the opposite can happen too. You don't want to get to a point where, say, let's drop it down to negative 12 dB. Do you hear that? You hear it audibly that it's not punchy, it's not hitting as much as it was. And there's a reason for that, okay? The biggest reason is we've dropped our input level. So imagine this, if you will. Dropping your input level here, okay, is going to impact the amount of signal that reaches the front of the input on your amplifier block. Okay, so that's critical to know, because if you're going to have a lesser signal going to your amp block, you're not going to have as good of a signal through and through to that input. And you're more than likely, especially if you're playing something like metal or a metalhead like I am and chug a lot and do those types of things, it's going to be harder to do. You're going to have to put more gain in and more leveling and more volume in order to be able to get it to where you would expect it to be. Okay, so definitely avoid keeping your volume input low here on this level. You want it to get it as close as you can to clipping without clipping. And that means in this case, for this guitar and configuration at Unity 100% on the volume knob, we are going to go 0 dB, and that should be perfect for where I need it to be. Just one more check. I could probably go up slightly too, but I know on this particular guitar and in my configuration, I can go to a different voicing on this guitar, and it boosts a little bit more, a little further, to a point where it'll be right at the edge of breakup on that that clipping. So on this particular case, I know this is one of my higher output guitars. We're going to keep it right there. So this is what you're going to do, okay? Now, if you're at 0 and you plug your guitar in, okay, and it's still down here towards the middle and not getting up here when you're, you know, doing some of these higher strums and maybe some chugs and things like that, start slowly bringing up this level. And just continue to kind of see where you're going to get to with it to get here. Now, what I will tell you, just quickly across here, and I've already done a couple of videos on introductions to I/O settings and being able to do some of this, but don't make changes here. If you're using a guitar especially and not doing other things, which in this case I'm just going to assume in this video you're using a guitar, so don't worry about any of these. But ground lift, for example, if you're not dealing with a microphone, you should be okay, right? So obviously most of these seem to be geared around a microphone, especially this Phantom 48 volt. If you're not using a microphone, do not turn this on, okay? Don't turn it on. Look at my other videos for intro to the Quad Cortex for beginners to understand why a little bit, but it's definitely a microphone only setting, and there's very specific things that this does. 48V means 48 volt. Electric and sending signal to be able to do more with that is a dangerous thing. You do not want to do that if you're not having devices that are suitable for it. leave all of this alone. Impedance, the only real place that I could tell you you're going to potentially want to change this, and I wouldn't really change it if you can avoid it, unless you really understand what you're kind of trying to do, is if you have active pickups, say you're like a bassist or something like that, and have really, really hot, sludgy, like active pickups, impedance could potentially help you a little bit for volume control here, where you might want to make some changes to be able to really balance out very high and or low impedance pickups, and that's a very custom kind of configuration that most people probably aren't going to really run into unless they're pros. Okay, and if you are, you already know what you're doing, and I'm sure this is not going to be anything new to you for this type of device. But if you're a beginner, I'm assuming most everyone is watching this video, don't touch it, leave it at 1. Just work with your input level. That's the main thing we want to do. Like I mentioned, I think it's probably a really good idea if you're a guitarist and soloing on this device yourself. Balance where you see fit to make that work on 1, and I would probably carry that same configuration over to 2, just to make sure that you're getting continuity across both of these inputs. Okay. So that's going to be what we do to be able to balance our input. Now let's take a look at your output.
Let's take a look at our output levels now. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting on a preset because there's more variables to deal with to get through this signal chain to finally get to your output. Okay, there's a lot of alteration of your potential sound and levels that are going to happen with each device block that your signal passes through. All right, specifically, and obviously your amplifier is going to be one of those biggest ones, right? Because you control volume and gain and leveling and different EQ that is going to alter the state of the sound when it comes out, as well as overdrive pedals and all these different processes and effects that potentially can change leveling, because you have a lot of times like boost pedals and tube screamers and doing these different types of things which do exactly that, right? They make it even hotter with your input coming in, which ultimately when you're leveraging your amplifier and your outputs is probably going to impact the way your output is as well. Okay, so one of the biggest things that I like to do to get started when I'm trying to balance a preset, and so here's the thing, what we did on the input is global, okay, and that's helpful. It gets you started. It gets all your balancing for the most part good on your inputs. But with output, it's a little hard. You don't have a global output control that's going to be universal, and I mean, you kind of do with your IO settings. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you can alter some of the levels that you get with gain for output, but that's not really how you want to do it. And each preset is going to have a different flavor to it, right? A different dynamicy, if you will. So when you get to this point, you're going to have to kind of flavor each one of your presets to be able to give you what you need. And so leveraging the same, IO setting for your input, and then taking your hottest guitar again and trying to kind of balance your presets a little bit more to be able to make this happen is your best bet. So I would suggest whatever your preset is going to be used with a guitar, use that guitar to dial it in. Make sure that you're doing that. So don't take a guitar that's going to be hotter or milder, if you will, of a pickup configuration, and then try to configure a preset and then go back to it and say, well, what the heck? Why is it too low or too high or pops and bangs or whatever? Like, use something that's going to be what you would leverage live, for example, if you're a live player, so that way you have the best opportunity to dial this in exactly where you need it to be. And I would probably also suggest give yourself a little bit of headroom when it comes to your output levels as well, because it's very easy to start clipping if you start strumming harder, if you start adding effects and doing some of those things. So be prepared for that. This is a bit of a challenge to be able to go through. First thing that I suggest, if your preset that you're looking to balance your outputs on has alteration blocks like overdrive, chorus, something of the sort, delays, whatever, turn all of these off. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn all of these off in your signal chain, which they should be now. Maybe I turn that one back on. Oh, there you go. Okay, so all I have is a couple of utility gates, which are just a simple gate here, which I can probably get rid of anyways. I'll just turn it off. It doesn't matter. I already am using the other simple gate. And I believe this is an overall volume at the end for my output that I have with my expression pedal. My expression pedal is set to 100% right now. I'm just gonna leave this guy going. I'll turn it off too, whatever. I'm gonna make this as deadpan easy as it can be for this description. So, sorry, this is a little bit of a roundabout here. Turn everything off except for your amp and your cab. Okay, let's start here. Let's start to get a baseline of what we're working with. And what I would suggest, if you can, is I would take a look first at your amplifier. Now let's see where you're at on your preset. Now, if you're using a out-of-the-box preset, right, most of the out-of-the-box presets for the Quad Cortex starts at volume at 0 dB, because again, they assume unity when you're using these things. So for the most part, you're going to find that that's the case. Same with gain. Okay, so to start dialing in the flavor of where you want these to be, I would try to get your tone where you want it, right? But actually start by dropping volume to 0 dB. Let's start at a place that's understood, that's a neutral. Okay, so being at 100% unity with that big volume knob and starting with 0 dB on your volume output for your amp is going to be a good place to start. And then we're going to take a look at your output. In this case, I'm using multi-out. So that means that we're basically going to be using outputs 1, 2, 3, 4, and I believe also the XLR 1 and 2. That's what you're gonna have with this setting. But regardless of that, that's fine. What I've done in this preset is I've had to go with a -5 dB for my volume level to be able to not clip. And again, this is because I have some things going on in this configuration, right? I have an overdrive, I have a tube screamer, and I also have obviously like EQing and different things. So even gain at 0 is still going to add things when it comes to volume to what we have. And since we've taken our input from our global settings, as you remember in the last section of the video, up to a level where we're right at the edge of clipping, but not quite, we've strengthened our input level here, which means that more than likely what comes out the other end is going to be a little too hot. Right, and that's natural. That's what happens. So if I take this volume and put it to 0, so just type it in. It's too hard to use the mouse there. Let's put it at 0. Now watch your output level. See that? See that red? We don't want that red. So what we want to do is we want to try to avoid it, and we just start to taper down where this volume is to get out of that zone of red. So it's same concept as our input. We want to hold as close as we can to this line. Mouse bigger right there. This line without going over. So I put it to 2.5. Let's see if that's any better. It's a little better, but we're still clipping. I'm just going to cheat because I already know where my sweet spot is here. Drop it back to -5 dB. Look at our output level. Right at the edge. If I'm like really digging in with some. Yep, that's good. That will be good. So for every preset that you have, taking this approach and at least getting yourself to this baseline level will help you. Now you're going to want to come back and check this output level a few times through the process, especially if you're going to be adding things here that are going to add more gain. It's good to be able to make sure of. Now, you shouldn't have that much of a change, right? But just remember, as much as you boost these inputs, you can still have that alter your volume and level output through your amp because you're doing exactly that. So now I've turned my couple of devices back on. So I got a compressor and I got a overdrive, right? And a, what is this, a chorus too. Let me turn the chorus off, whatever. I just want to show you what at least this looks like. That's what it sounds like. Now let's take a look at our output to see what our output levels are like. Doesn't really look like it changed all that much. We're pretty good on that spot. It does, I can see it slightly bumped it, so I'm right at the edge here. Playing a little softer, which is just fine. It's exactly where I want it to be. But as you add other equipment, especially if you're running configurations where you do like stereo config with 2 different amps and maybe even multiple cabs and such, as you start to do that with multi-out, you're going to want to continually watch this output level because it's going to put these outputs together more than likely, especially if you're playing through a power amp or something similar. That output is going to work the same. It's going to be combined. So that's going to boost your levels here. So you want to be able to check your overall leveling. So if you have a more advanced configuration, check all of your outputs to make sure that they're leveled correctly. If you're not using if you're not using like specifically designated outputs, right? So if you're not changing that to just output 1 or just output 2, instead you're using multi-out, this is okay. Just monitor multi-outs output level. Wow, that was a mouthful. To make sure that you're not going over this limit here, or else you're going to see that clipping occur. There you have it. Quick and dirty video on being able to level your inputs and outputs on the Quad Cortex. It's a pretty straightforward process. Like I mentioned, there is a lot of different varieties of configuration you can have that might alter some of those steps that I gave you. But as long as you focus on your I/O settings for your input globally, setting them to something that makes sense for the instruments that you're plugging through, and then taking a look at your actual overall output for each preset and getting things as close as you can to the edge of that clipping region is going to give you that continuity that I think you're going to be looking for. You shouldn't have volume swells and dips and such in your presets. You should be able to get them exactly where you need them to be. Now, I will give you a warning. If you're dealing with things that are going to be, say, for example, like more chuggy and metal based, they're going to have higher output, and then switch to a section of a preset or scene or something similar, we're going to like really exponentially drop your gain and get you to a clean tone. You're more than likely going to have to boost that volume a little bit to make that happen. So keep that in mind. If you're using a preset, of which then you're using scenes for each one of them, you might have to actually have a volume control that kind of boosts you, or gain control that boosts you a little further if you're going to go clean, to be able to get you to that same leveling that you had when you were in a more distorted tone and doing things of this sort. Okay, so experiment with that. You'll see what I mean. Whatever you do, just avoid not having that volume knob at 100%. And avoid clipping at all costs, both in your input and your output, and you should be a-okay. If you got any questions or comments, please make sure to leave them below. I would love to be able to connect with you guys and be able to help as much as I can. So I'm here for you. Let me know if this has been helpful. I'll see you in the next one.